all across the U.S., help them, learn how to pass this policy in their local jurisdictions, how to a leadership meeting. We have a lot of resources you can use. So contact us at decriminalizenature.org for more information. Also, really happy to introduce Rachel, who's our behind the scenes maverick there, helping us with all the podcast production and all the other information going on out there. So, Rachel will also be watching the chat box. So, if you have any questions for Shannon or myself over the course of the show, please go ahead and put those in the chat box, and Rachel will give those to us in about the last 10 minutes of the show or so. We're really excited to have this not only on the YouTube Live platform, but also in a couple weeks, this will be on our Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other platforms. If you'd like to see the continuation of the show, please go ahead and give a donation. We'll have a donation link in the box there, or come to our website at decriminalizenature.org. Really happy to have the show and really excited to continue learning from leaders all across the world. Really excited to have our guest today, who's Shannon Lee, come to speak with us. Shannon's a healer and a deep journeyer of the psychedelic and entheogenic realms. Also an integration facilitator, doing some amazing work. I met Shannon a couple months ago, I think, something like that, at a panel for plant medicine people. We had a really nice conversation. There was quite a few people on the panel, but I think I really appreciated your perspective, your ability to look at multiple paradigms at the same time and really come from a variety of different directions, and also open to ideas that maybe considered a little bit unusual to some folks, but like this is what we deal with every day when we're talking about these deep inner spaces, these deep inner journey spaces. So I really wanted to have you on here to really kind of unpack all that, and really excited to have you here. I know you had a great rainy morning there in Guatemala today, so thank you for spending a little time to speak with us. But how are you doing today, Shannon?
Oh, I'm doing great. I'm just so happy to be here, just to have the opportunity to be on such a beautiful platform like this that's making a difference in the world, and be able to, share my voice and perspective to, help people, work with medicines in a way that's truly beneficial and can really create long-term transformation.
Mm. Yeah, I think that's key, that long-term transformation part, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, maybe we could start off with a little bit of a background bio. Tell us a little about, how you got here, what kind of interested you in entheogenic psychedelic plants and mushrooms, and how you got to where you're at today.
Yeah, absolutely. So I facilitate private one-on-one psilocybin ceremonies. I like to work one-on-one with people because that is what has made the biggest impact for me. I believe that a lot of people go and sit in many ceremonies, make many trips down to the jungle, sit with ayahuasca, sit with mushrooms, whatever medicine, and then they still find that there's still something stuck. There's still these patterns that are just continuing to go. And what I have found is working one-on-one with someone who has deep access to the shamanic realms, the weird unseen stuff, is what helped me clear those really deep things that just weren't moving. And also, I have found for me that this is where I can actually pour from a full cup. Like, I can really show up and have enough to give to each individual person. I find in the larger group spaces, people can kind of hide. They receive some healing, but they can kind of be like, oh, I don't really want to go there. So the one-on-one really invites people who are really ready to just do the really deep work. And, the way I found myself here, I'll share a little bit of, I grew up in a very religious home. My mom was what I would call a holy roller. My friends would come over for slumber parties and she's like, everybody needs to pray. And eventually I started out in the Catholic Church, and then eventually my mom decided she wanted to try out other churches. And at one point we found ourselves going to a Pentecostal church. And I loved it. I mean, I was always very spiritual from a very young age. But the Pentecostal church really struck me because their praise and worship was big and grand. And like, I really felt spirit in the music. And, every Sunday, my mom would be at the front speaking tongues and like passing out. Like, I mean, she was having a deep mystical experience. And, now that I've activated different light languages, I know that that's actually what was happening to her. Different beings, I feel, were speaking through her to help her lift densities. And so anyways, while we were going to this church, it was coinciding with the same time as I was in a really beautiful relationship. So about in the same month, I got rebaptized into this church. And then I also lost my virginity. And so this brought up so much inner turmoil around shame and my self-worth. Was I going to hell? Like, what does this mean? I was so confused. And, long story short, I eventually like rebelled really hard. Like I felt like I had already given up my worth and I became really promiscuous. And I eventually, after high school, ended up becoming a stripper. And then I eventually had someone come into my life who planted the seed of being an escort. So for about 5 years in my early 20s, I was an escort. And I mean, I was just piling on the shame and also just picking up lots of dense energies, lots of other people's karmic stuff. And I mean, I was really at rock bottom. And I even got arrested a couple times. And, the sex work itself was one thing, but the part that was really um, what really just hurt my soul was the fact that I was lying to everyone in my life. So, I mean, I had so many friends that had no idea what I was doing. I was lying to my family, and it was just like this big, big secret. And so, my entire spiritual awakening has really been about learning how to be transparent, both with myself, like be really honest about who I am, what I believe, um, how I'm self sabotaging, how I'm maybe not speaking up with others, like really learning how to just be transparent. And so, I eventually quit doing sex work and, I was actually saved and it was a beautiful way. And I've actually written a memoir that I'm in the process of finishing or fine tuning, where my first husband actually like saved me from this experience. And then after he and I got divorced, eventually I met my second husband who would end up being my first like karmic contract that like blew up my life and like shook up my reality to what is possible. And this happened at the same time as I found psychedelics. So I was not only experiencing like really beautiful love at the same time, I was also having this expansion of my consciousness. And I mean, it's so hard to put into words. But what happened in this relationship was I knew I needed to be able to tell him what I had been through as a sex worker. I knew that I couldn't actually sustain this relationship and hide my past. So we were called to go to Peru and sit with ayahuasca, and this was the question that I brought to her was, what do I do? How do I handle this? Because part of me was like, oh, maybe it's just for me to accept and it's not actually about sharing it. Or maybe it is about sharing it and allowing someone else to help me hold it. And of course, that first ceremony, nothing happened. It was one of those ceremonies we hear about a lot of people go sit with ayahuasca. And, I just sat there in anxiety and frustration that I had flown all the way to Peru and she's not teaching me anything. Everyone else is having this beautiful experience. And I'm just, yeah. So the next morning, after we had our integration circle and, I hear everyone else's stories and I'm feeling even more disappointed, I went back to my tombo by myself and then the medicine finally spoke. And she was like, you already know what to do. The medicine's not going to do it for you. So I went and got my partner and I sat him down and I told him everything. And, I had in my mind planned to share this in a softer, more gentle, less messy way than it was. And I found whenever it finally came out, it just came out so true, just enough detail so he understood how heavy it was. And yeah, I mean, from there, my life just opened up. And really, it's just been a continuous journey of fine tuning my voice, staying regulated enough to be able to speak my truth, not people please. Also understand my own energetic system in terms of being an ambivert. I'm very 50-50, an extrovert and introvert. And if one side doesn't get fed, my energy gets really weird. So learning when I'm past my capacity with socializing and, when I need to go inward in order to like really stay connected to who I am. And through this, basically, so we went back to New York City where we were living at the time after sitting with ayahuasca, and oh my God, the integration was just, it was a shit show. It was so bad. And we didn't even know what integration was at the time. He had extensive experience with psychedelics, and but still, like, integration was still quite new, I think. And also, I wasn't part of a big community of people working with psychedelics to really know. So we went back to living how we were, and eventually we were called to move to Guatemala. Yeah, I very much felt my spirit was like, it's time to live closer to nature. And, it's so interesting because my Chiron line, my astrocartography line, Chiron, the wounded healer, runs through Guatemala. So I was brought exactly where I needed to be to alchemize everything that I needed in order to step into my purpose. Because along with all of the shame, one of the other bigger things that I was working on was like, I was so desperate to find my purpose. Like, what is it that I'm supposed to be doing in this life? I'd been a hairstylist for like 15 years and, was really good at it. And it definitely is a very healing thing to give people. But I knew that there was something deeper, and I knew I was supposed to be working in the healing realms. And at the same time, as I felt that I was supposed to be working in the healing realms, there was all of this, like, but why me? Like, I'm still a mess. Like, I used to do sex work. Like, that couldn't possibly be, what I'm worthy of or intended to be doing. So, anyways, moved to Guatemala, and it was within a couple months that I met my mentor, an amazing woman who is a shamanic healer. She's claircognizant, and it was with her that I started doing one-on-one sessions. She works specifically with rape, and began to unfold the direction that I was intended to move. And it was in actually my first session with her. She actually did it just because she wanted to. She was like, hey, I want to do a rape ceremony with you. And, she's like, it's not quite time. Like, I'll let you know when it's time. And eventually she's like, all right, it's time. Next week, let's do a rape ceremony. And I had sat with rape once, but it was with someone who, let's just say, I didn't feel that they were in full integrity. There was a lot of performance happening. So I felt like I hadn't properly met the medicine. And this rape ceremony, I mean, for the first probably like hour, she was doing energy clearings on me. And then she had me lay down, and I began to feel this very palpable, dense, not dense as in like negative, but like just, I felt like something else was pressing against my fingertips. I could just feel it so strongly. And for like a whole other hour, I was moving my hands and maneuvering this energy. And it was just almost more psychedelic than anything I had ever experienced. And I came out of this trance, this experience, just being like, whoa, what was that? And I look up at my mentor, and she looks at me and she says, she's like, Shannon, she was like, you are amazing. She was like, you're a medicine woman. She was like, I kept asking, the rape, is your medicine rape? And it was like, no. And I asked if it was the mushroom, and it said yes. And I immediately was like, oh, oof, okay. I'm like, that feels amazing. Like, I had already guided, friends through their first experiences. Well, not really guided. Like, I had the honor of being the person that they trusted to do their first experience with. And, friends who hadn't sat with medicine in 8 years, and they had chosen me to do that journey with. So it felt like, okay, yeah, like that feels true. And I'm like, that is one of the biggest honors one could have. And it's also something that comes with just so much karmic responsibility. So I just kind of sat with it. And of course, like 5 days later, I had a client come and get her hair done with me. And she shared that she had just sat with the Mazatec mushrooms, the mushrooms that Maria Sabina used to use. And I was like, oh my God, we have access to this strain. Like, this feels very synchronistic because, I had looked up to Maria Sabina and her story and, the way that she worked with the medicine. And so I decided to take 5 grams of the Mazatec mushrooms on the Gemini full moon on my Chiron line here in Guatemala. My Chiron is in Gemini, and with the intention of just asking the medicine, do I have permission? And asking my higher self, like, how do I feel about it? And what happened is I, at very early on in the experience, like, I mean, the medicine came on really strong. I was immediately in a very just potent DMT world. And I started to think about my financial situation at the time. I had a very sticky situation going, and I was like, oh shit, like, okay. And the medicine was like, are you going to go there? And I immediately was like, no, no, I'm not, because I trust it. I trust it. I trust it. I trust it. And what I meant by this was, I trust the universe. Like, I don't need to go down that wormhole, that spiral of fear. I don't need to dissect it anymore. It was something that I very much was like, I can patiently wait it out and I think it's going to work out, but it just didn't look good. And I mean, I proceeded to go through, I mean, who knows how long this was, but I mean, I was viscerally shaking, crying, screaming, and just continuously saying, I trust it, I trust it, I trust it. And I felt the medicine just shaking all of this fear out of my body. And whenever it finally stopped, I began to channel this light language. And it was fierce, it was strong, and it was just like cutting and slicing all of these cords and energetic structures down my entire ancestral line. And this went on for a very long time. And then it moved to a more, I would say it's like Mother Earth, like the voice of Mother Earth in frequency form. And this voice started to channel through me. And the message that I was left with was, if I choose to hold this medicine space, I can trust that I will be guided by something higher than myself. And then it was about a week later where a friend chose to trust me to guide her through the space. And there I learned that we didn't have the right energetic parameters, like guidelines. It was too blended between us being friends. I learned everything, a lot that I needed to learn in that first ceremony. And then I didn't hold a ceremony for almost 2 years and just went through just really deep integration. Found myself back in Peru, doing 2 dietas and working one-on-one with a teacher there. And while I was there, I really opened up the capacity to work with different interdimensional beings of light in order to just navigate those realms. And it was fascinating because I mean, it was so hard, like being there for 3 weeks. I felt like I got everything I wanted that very first ceremony. And I was like, why do I have 3 more weeks here? This is going to be so hard. And it was so challenging. I was so ready to get out. And there's been this resistance to just continuing the path as a medicine woman. Like, it is so confronting. Like, has required me to go through some of the deepest, darkest, heaviest initiations and to be so patient with myself. I've spent probably the greater half of the last 3 years in solitude. I live at the top of a mountain in Guatemala, and I'm here a lot. And so, anyways, one of probably the biggest initiations that I feel is just really important to share, because it's a big part of my work, is that after those 3 weeks in Peru, the medicine told me, don't worry about what any of this means. Because of course, at the end, I was like, well, what does this mean? Like, what do I do next? And she was like, go live your life for 6 months. And at the end of 6 months, I'll tell you what's next. And now I had like a whole summer of like travel planned with my husband at the time. And we were going to go to Berlin, Burning Man, like all over. And I had 2 months to like integrate in Guatemala before starting this. But anyways, I don't really know whether she really said, go live your life for 6 months, or if I was just like, I'm going to do it anyway, because I'm not quite ready to trade like some of my lifestyle. Like, I still love to go to see electronic music, take acid, and, a large group of people. There was a lot of things that I was like, I love this. Do I have to stop? And so essentially, I ended up in Berlin, and I ended up picking up a dark entity. And I didn't know it when it happened, but I slowly, over the course of the next 4 months after that, just was not okay. Like, was on the verge of psychosis. But because of the amount of like nervous system work that I had done, and I mean, honestly, just the truth that like the light is stronger than the dark, I was able to stay above water. But I mean, I wasn't me. And I mean, so much so that on my 36th birthday, we were in Sedona. We were going to be going to Burning Man in a few days. And like for my birthday, we just laid along this beautiful like river. And I just was crying and crying and crying. And it was not attached to any emotion, but it just wouldn't stop. I mean, it was hours of me just crying. And I'm just like, I just don't know what's going on. And I had seen my mentor for an energy clearing session, and she didn't really find anything specific. So I was like, okay, like I don't know what this is, and like didn't know what to think about it. And fast forward, I mean, it just was the hardest next like year of my life. Ayahuasca was honest at the 6 month mark. She said, okay, your next step now is to work on your nervous system, go get your yoga teacher training. Then after that, she said, go get your breathwork training. And then she's like, do the breathwork again. And like, she very much was like, these are your next step. It's all in the nervous system. And the amount of how grounded you can be is how clear you can be as a channel. And eventually, this also all resulted in me and my ex-husband getting divorced. Honestly, his entities working with my entities, it was just so messy because that's the way that they work. When someone else is carrying something and you're carrying something, they like feed off of each other. They just create chaos. I mean, they can even like fuck with your internet. They can do all kinds of different things. And so my mentor, she had left Guatemala and tried to find somewhere else to live, and she ended up finding her way back here. And she came back to Guatemala after having done a few weeks in Brazil working with the tribe there. And she had a Vakash. And she had had an entity that she had been carrying for like 20 years, something she had picked up whenever she was in her 20s and was still drinking. And she'd had this cleared, and she's like sharing with me this story. And as she's sharing it with me, I just began bawling. And because I mean, she was elated. She's like, oh my God, I cleared this thing. It's finally gone. Like life is opening up. And I'm just bawling. And I'm like, I don't know why. And she was like, because there's some truth there. And that's whenever I identified, yeah, like I had picked something up. And because her entity was gone, she was now able to see mine and tell me exactly when it was in Berlin that I had picked it up. And the interesting part about it was because like there were nights that I had, taken too much medicine. And this was the night where we'd had 2 beers. It was a chill fucking night, but we were a little bit hungover and tired from the night before. And she was like, that's actually a lower frequency than overindulgence because you're pushing past your capacity. Like you're tired. And so that was really illuminating. And I ended up clearing it through doing an ancient Ekadasi Kriya by a woman that teaches here in Guatemala. And I was able to clear it from my field. But then I had to sit with a Ecuadorian shaman who she was able to like clear it from essentially like my outer realms. So there's a difference between it still being attached to your consciousness and then it's still kind of being in the peripheral and being able to cause havoc. And, this created just so much necessity to like learn how to surrender because I had so many questions of like, how much of the destruction of my relationship with my ex was because of the entity? Was that actually supposed to happen? Or was this truly divine? And, in the end, my belief actually is that I was always intended to leave that relationship and I wasn't going to, and that I'd actually signed a soul contract with this entity to come in if I hadn't done it on my own. And so I believe very much that even dark frequencies, they're actually of the light in a sense. And I mean, I learned just so much from this experience. It's what activated me to be able to know how to clear demons and entities from other people. And ultimately, it's because I'm able to speak truth as much as possible. I want to say always, and it's close to always that when I'm speaking, it for me, it's the truth. And so because of that, what I say in a ceremony, it goes. Like the spirits must listen because the power of my voice has been harmonized and activated to that extent. And because I have absolutely no fear of these entities, because I know how much I learned and how much I gained from it. And so, because of that, I have no fear of another one sticking to me. I believe if another one comes in at some point in time, it's because for whatever reason, my higher self said, she's got to learn this way again. So, that's kind of it. And, since then, I mean, I've been holding, yeah, one-on-one ceremonies here in Guatemala. I've, yeah, cleared demons from people. I've had the demons literally running around the ceremonial space, blowing out candles, trying to stop me from clearing them. Like it's been wild. And I just laugh thinking, the little girl in church did not think that she was going to be working with, you know, demons and entities. And I love it. I think it's life changing when someone realizes that, yeah, there's just literally blocking. It's like a veil. I like to describe it as, say you're talking to someone who has, opposing political views. So, someone, oh, let's just say it, someone who, is supporting Trump, and you're, trying to tell them, I just don't think that that's really a positive thing for humanity or whatever. And they just literally can't hear you. And I believe that they literally can't. It's not because they're a bad person. It's because like there is a large chunk of their consciousness that has been fed certain belief systems that like it just literally can't penetrate. And it's given me it saved me so much energy, whenever I can tell someone literally can't hear me. It's given me so much compassion for whenever I see people acting out of their character, knowing that, it's not always them. And yeah, I feel like that's really, yeah, kind of sum it up.
Wow, wonderful. Wow, Shannon, thank you for that. That's lots of. I took a lot of notes, and I don't know if I'm going to cover. We could cover everything just on your bio there. So I'm going to try and dance around this a little bit. But just on that last part you're talking about, I always call it the Agent Smith or the status quosis, which is basically like when somebody you're talking to is so into this other worldview, and you're talking to them like a friend, and then you say something that triggers novelty, unknown, fear, whatever else, and it's like zzz, it's like they short circuit, and like the system comes through, or however you want to call that, and now all of a sudden you're speaking to the system or the propaganda or their narrative or whatever. Again, there's a million ways to talk about it, and then yeah, exactly like you're saying, like how do you talk to the system that's not also your friend? And then you have to remember, like, okay, there's two things happening here, and one of them is my friend who isn't in charge right now, and the other one is the systematic thinking that comes through, or these entities, or these powerful narratives, or whatever you want to call them. And then how do you sort of dance with both of them while knowing that your friend's still there, not to hold a grudge afterwards when they kind of short circuit back into themselves again. um,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So that's really really awesome to hear, and it's funny to hear you say also that you didn't think that as a little child and in church and everything like that you'd be doing this today. But when you tell your story, it seems like there's all foreshadowing clues across the way. You're growing up spiritual. You're familiar with that. That's another conversation I want to jump into too for maybe some of the more secular folks out there. What is even spirituality? What does spiritual mean? What are entities? How do we describe these? We'll touch that in a second. But to see then to go from that to the Pentecostal, which is really about entity engagement. It's about letting yourself be open to these other energies, letting that channel come through, whatever else. So again, as you're sort of younger, it's not surprising to see that. And then your work with sex work. I was dating a sex worker for some time, and she was so profound, and like, and I don't know how this is, everyone experiences their work differently, but she was like, there's so much healing, and like sex workers don't get any credit for the amount of healing that they're doing. Like they touch on psychological issues that a therapist will never even see, because people are, like you said, shamed about it or afraid to talk about it, or certain, she worked more in kind of the fetish realm, and so certain fetishes that are so complexified, that you wouldn't even like imagine them to be something that would be, of course these people aren't talking to anyone else, but if she can get them there, then all of a sudden, boom, they're telling all these stories and all this information that really is a psychotherapeutic interaction, so again, I see that, as another part of your healing process, and then kind of going through your story about how you discovered psychedelics and, both the sort of um, fun side or recreational side from the parties and the music and the LSD and things, and then also sort of the more sort of ritual, ceremonial, spiritual practices. So again, yeah, I see your whole train here to get you to where you're at right now is pretty impressive, and it just makes sense that one thing led to the next, and really, happy that you found your way to where you're at right now.
Yeah, me too. Me too. And I love that you bring this up about the sex work. I mean, honestly, it's an incredibly healing experience. And it's just the fact that like the space is set. Everyone knows their role, there's boundaries spoken of. It's more of a safe space than a lot of relationships. So I shared like I'm finishing a memoir, and it's really like the goal of it is to dismantle the under the destruction that's been done around sacred sexuality, and the separation of the masculine and the feminine. What I found is that men actually really craved the same amount of like just intimacy that women do, but they just didn't know how to ask for it, and they felt judged, and they many of them were really just looking for someone to talk to, someone who wasn't going to judge them. And yeah, I mean, for me, overall, it was a really positive experience. And when I was in the middle of it, I thought I was like, oh, I'm so off track. But now, after having had, past life remembrances of being in ancient Egypt and being a sex priestess, I know that this was a direction that I was intended to move through. Um, so yeah, I love that you bring that up.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and here in the Bay Area, I don't know if you're familiar. In San Francisco, there was obviously when the gold rush came, and there was a lot of fights, and a lot of people were being violent, and a bunch of guys being all guys stuff, And then there was a crew of women who there's a bunch of streets named after them now in Natoma and a couple others in sort of the central downtown San Francisco area. And I've heard people have sort of be repulsed by this term, but also interesting that it's that they were called this. They called themselves the Soiled Doves, meaning that they're the peacekeepers in town. So when there was anxiety or violence or tension or whatever else, they would come into the place and ease the tension by making sure people could access their relief, so to speak. And they were kind of the peacekeepers. So again, it just speaks to how many levels of power can come into this interaction where you're able to access these sacred sexuality, or maybe not even so sacred, but in a way healing for the individual or for the community. So again, yeah, I just want to kind of honor that and give props to that. In your process too. Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just saying that's so interesting. And I just think that, we're here to have a human experience. And so we're here to experience both sides. So you say, maybe not so sacred sexuality, but would we know sacred if we didn't kind of know the opposite?
Right. Right. Exactly. So that kind of very nicely rolls into the next question I was going to ask is for folks that out here that maybe don't have a spiritual background like you do, or understand the sacred in many different sort of ways and contexts that you do, how would you describe both maybe the sacred, which seems to be one thing, maybe we try and use a slightly secular but not secular term for decrim nature, which is like, reverence. It's something that's deserving of reverence, right? But also you're talking about spirit and spirituality, and we talk about these realms that we go to, and some people are like, oh, well, that's just imagination, or that's just a dream world, or that's just archetypes. How do you sort of differentiate and suss out that? Are you speaking to an archetype? Is it no different than a spirit? A spirit, when you talk to these entities that you're engaging with, do they exist? Is it more of a psychological? Like there's a lot of, and I have a sense I know what you're thinking anyway on this, but and myself as well in terms of like really unpacking this. But how do you see that, and how would you explain this to somebody that doesn't really have this framing for spirituality?
Yeah, I mean, one, I would say every possibility of how you can view it is all true.
Mm,
Like, there's just many different ways that you can see it. And I don't think one is right or wrong. I think we all just work with them in different ways. Different ways resonate with different people. What I call spirituality is just understanding one's own spirit. And then through understanding your own spirit, you begin to understand how your spirit relates to everything around you. And and then yeah, then spirituality begins to encompass everything.
Mm.
And in terms of like the archetypes, and I don't know, it's interesting. I feel like the sacred and reverence is the same. It's just something that you're slowing down to give time, attention, and devotion to, like
Mm.
a willingness to, yeah, respect that you don't know everything, that we don't know everything. The willingness to show up to, I mean, with plant medicines, that's really what it is. Like, especially in ceremony. I mean, I feel like every single time, um, it's a matter of me humbly showing up and knowing that, okay, yeah, I've learned a lot, but the main thing that I've learned is how to surrender and give myself up to a higher power.
Mm.
And that higher power, we can call it whatever. We can call it the divine, we can call it God, we can call it Mother Earth, the universe. I don't think any of those answers are wrong. I don't really have true definitions of it. And then whenever it comes to like demons, entities, astral parasites, like archetypes, I think they're all one and the same. And a lot of people say like, oh, they believe that astral parasites or entities are just something that we have created with our own consciousness. And I believe that that is true, but it actually doesn't negate that there is a very real human experience that happens where, like for me, for example, the entity jumped onto me because I was holding something of a similar frequency from someone else. Had
Mm.
I not gone there that night, had I listened to my body, I wouldn't have had to learn that lesson that way. I wouldn't have been in that space. So I was of the frequency to draw in that lesson. And my higher self was like, yeah, let's invite something in that's going to feed on these, beliefs around, yeah, self-worth and boundaries, and really highlight and like help you see how clearly and how vital it is for you to heal these and stop living this way.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I feel like that question is a hard one to even quite break down for me.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean that's that's why we ask them, right? Because because there's no real good answer, and it's just interesting to hear. All of us, especially that have been doing this deep work, have had to face those questions over and over again. Again, my background, was neuroscience. When I did my undergrad, and I kind of came into the psychology of spirituality through my process, but in that process, also got into archetypes. Okay, what's the difference between an archetype and a being and an entity? Is it just psychology? Is it not? And talked about looked at Jung's Red Book and all that kind of thing, and he was saying these things had independent agency outside of the self. So again, is the archetype of the street corner? Does the street corner exist? Can we go places in these realms and meet each other in these spaces? If so, what does that mean? For me too, when I look at like spirituality, people ask, it's like it's just knowing, just as a very base level, just knowing that there's more to consciousness than inside the brain. The
Yeah.
first from a neuroscientific perspective, first time I realized, like, the first mushroom experience I had that was profound, first breakthrough, was the aha moment. I ask this sometimes in talks, who have had that experience, it's like, okay, we have the walls of breathing or all that kind of, or visions, but then that experience where you're like, wow, this is so much bigger, right? And I think that for me is a lot of this spirituality, this sacredness, and you get into these conversations around who am I dialoguing with? Ayahuasca was the first time where I had to think about, what does plant teacher mean? What does plant guide? What does plant spirit mean? Is this, I'm having a relationship with this thing that's outside of myself that I didn't think even had consciousness before? So one question that always comes up for me, and I'm curious your thoughts on this, is, do you consider like an ayahuasca or a mushroom or whatever other plant material, mushroom material you're working with, to be a key or a doorway or a deity? Does it matter? How do you relate with that? Is it opening the door for other deity conversations? Like, how do you view the continuum of those sort of interactions?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see it as a doorway, as like a fast track to higher states of consciousness and the evolution of humanity. I believe as a collective, as Mother Earth, we are evolving really, really quickly, and that they are, created by Mother Earth, honestly, to save Mother Earth. I think it's for us to actually, ingest her medicines and or things that were created in her soils, the fungi, and actually begin to have her consciousness more woven into us. And so that way we can start making decisions are in her favor, and which is ultimately in our favor. You know, I mean, I think most of us have had an experience where she's shown us that we are one and the same. What's happening with Mother Earth is, you know, it's just a mirror for what's happening inside of ourselves, when we talk about like the pollutants of, plastic and things, and then what's happening with, everyone having, small plastic particles in their bodies. And yeah, I mean, I feel that they're here to help us, and I feel that they can be incredibly destabilizing, that not everyone needs to work with these medicines. I feel that some people, like, when we're born awakened, and maybe they able to like meditate really easily from a very young age and like never lose that. Maybe they're just already tapped into their creative force, and they're experiencing God through their creativity, through their music, through their art, like whatever it is. But I think many of us who have just lost ourselves, they can really just, yeah, drop help us drop into that state of inner knowing that like we're all doing this together. And yeah, there's just a bigger plan here. And that, yeah, there's much more going on than we think is, and that we have access to ask, whether it be different archetypes or, angels, spirit guides, ancestors, to help us. I really believe that we do have the ability to like call on so many different spirits to be like, hey, like I really need help with this. And they will. And it's been so funny, like my mom telling me to pray whenever I was a kid. And then now as I've gotten older, there's been points where my mom's been like, oh, like this is going on. And I'm like, Mom, have you prayed about it? And like, but I'm coming at it from like a different, I'm not really God in the church way, that has, is from like the patriarchy and all of that. Like, yeah, it's wild.
Full circle, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I like what you were talking there about sort of the evolution of consciousness. There's this philosopher named Gebser who talks a lot about maybe we should avoid evolution just because we don't know if the next stage is going to get better. I think you think probably that's the case. It would be getting better, but he would say maybe use the word mutation because then we don't know for sure, but it's something different. But I think this kind of taps into the where psychedelics are at right now, and I'm curious your thoughts because there seems to be this bifurcation you're seeing, right? There's plant medicine, there's mushroom medicines, there's nature-based stuff, and then there's a strong influence on the pharmaceutical realms, and even just like you were talking about in terms of outside of it being, oil synthetic on one side and plant mushrooms that come out of the ground on the other side, but even how do you hold space for somebody within a secular, sort of reductionistic medical clinical framework? You're not holding those spaces on those other realms as your mentor was and as you talk about as well. Whereas in these sort of more ceremonial ritual spaces, you're aware that there are potentials outside of the 3D space. How do you see this sort of evolution, if you will, or mutation, if you will, of these different approaches to psychedelics or entheogens right now, and sort of the differences that you're seeing there, and how is there a merging point? Will this continue getting further and further apart from each other? How do you sort of see what's coming up next?
Ooh. So this is something I've thought about a lot, and actually, grandmother ayahuasca has worked with me to kind of release my judgment of other ways that people are holding medicine spaces. And I believe that the clinical side is just like totally necessary, because some people are just going to hear me and think that she's totally woo woo, she's off her rocker, like that's not who I want holding me. I want the medical side. And I think it kind of doesn't matter. It's however the medicine reaches the people who need it, the people that are open to it. um this wasn't quite the question that you asked, but it's something that came in really strong that I feel is really important. I feel so I work with different interdimensional beings, and some of them are alien, extraterrestrial of origin. And I believe that they are here on Earth helping us, um, yeah, wake up, helping us evolve. And you said something around like, things seem to be like getting worse. I actually think right now, while we're seeing things appear to get worse with the war going on, the Epstein files, all of these things, I think we are at one of the most beautiful points. Like the light has actually gotten that bright that these things can no longer hide.
Mhm.
And I believe that we're not too far off from, extraterrestrials actually being present here on Earth and helping us greatly shift into just totally new ways of being. And, I one of the things ayahuasca showed me was just like literally stop fighting the other ways. Like you're using a lot of energy being like, I don't like that way that things are being done. Because part of me feels like the clinical side of working with entheogens is really corrupt in the sense that it puts everyone into like a pool as if everyone is, has similar diagnoses and things like that. And I believe whenever you're working with like a shamanic healer, and the way I work is I'm claircognizant. So I just get messages of clear knowing. And so, a clinical person isn't going to say to you, oh, there's something from your past life. There's a karmic contract that hasn't been closed. And that's what's preventing you from being able to create abundance in this lifetime. This is why you're continuing to call in, the same partners that aren't actually healthy for you. Um, it's just like night and day, but both have benefit. People taking the time to be in stillness and just being in a safe space entirely. I think so many of us haven't had the opportunity to just be with someone who's there fully to show up to listen to what our human experience has been like and help us reframe it.
That's great. I like how you pointed out the I think about this often. Like seems like things are going in a bad direction, but the fact that we're learning about this stuff seems bad because we're learning about it, but for decades it's been going on and we didn't know about it. So just the fact that
Yeah.
it's visible, that the Epstein files are out and well, who knows if they'll ever make it fully out, but at least people are talking about it. And even, while it's, again, could be considered woo to some folks, UFOs are like UAPs, UFOs, that's like a government released document. They're actually talking about it on the government level right now. Of course, we all think, okay, yeah, this is this other category that we can kind of dive into, but is it real? Is it not real? It's like now we're actually seeing, governmental military documents that says, hey, you know what, maybe there are those things flying around in the sky and maybe also they're here, and it's kind of like mind blowing to think about like, wow, okay, we're talking about this in a real way. Whereas for most of our lives, for many of us that are kind of in our era, our generation, it's all been, put to the entertainment or the fictional side of things. And so that's been really, like you're saying, I think a good sign that we're starting to see this come through. One thing I wanted to ask you a little bit too about, is I know you mentioned this was um, the homework assignments, right? And I've had a lot of experience like this as well. Like how do you like? It sounds like for you, you had ayahuasca was going to tell you in 6 months what's going to happen, and then 6 months comes around, and it's like, okay, you got to do this, this, and this, and then and how you relate to that information or homework, or you dismiss it or you do it, changes how the future, at least in my opinion, because I've seen it happen for me, how the future ayahuasca ceremonies will come through. So maybe talk a little bit about the homework assignment and how important it is to tap into it, and also how do you differentiate, and we might talk about this in the last panel too, between ego and direct transmission or the divine connection. Like, is it myself saying that I need to do these things, or is this other, greater hierarchy or some greater higher sort of presence homework assignment I need to address? So kind of both of those questions there.
Yeah. I mean, the discernment between the ego and like direct transmission or higher self. I mean, for me, it's definitely a matter of being grounded enough to really like tune in if my ego is the one saying it, if there's actually like a lot of resistance towards doing it the other way. For me, it also helps that I still work with my mentor, because there's like, hey, I honestly don't know which voice it is that's speaking. Am I self-sabotaging over here by going this direction? Or is it actually like, the message that I'm receiving, it just to my logical mind doesn't make any sense because we're actually moving into a new paradigm. We're actually moving in different ways, actually is the way.
Mhm.
Um, I'll give the example of I recently went through extreme burnout. And for about like 4 months, I woke up every day and I tuned into my guides and I was like, what am I supposed to be doing something? I'm like, surely there's something I'm supposed to be doing for my business. Maybe I'm supposed to be making a YouTube, whatever. And Spirit was like, you're just supposed to rest. You're just supposed to rest. And every day I would ask again and it would be the same. And, my mentor was like, it would be a lot more comfortable if you were doing something. She was like, so I think it's definitely the thing that you feel really uncomfortable doing, which is resting for this long, like integrating that way for that long. Um, and, homework assignments are so interesting because so in one of my ayahuasca ceremonies, the grandmother ayahuasca specifically said to me, stop doing integration work. Like that's not your lane. Focus on ceremony. And I didn't do it. I was like, I like doing integration work. I like doing like the complete project. And the next ceremony, it was over a year later, she's like, stop doing the integration work. She's like, you just went through this whole burnout. Like, you are intended to be really, really good at holding this one space really, really well. And then allowing someone else to take on, the responsibility of guiding them after that. Because I found that I was still holding on to little like energetic threads from ceremonies where, maybe I wished that they had taken more action towards the revelations that, had came through ceremony. And like, I have to just fully surrender that I did the best that I could in that ceremony, and the rest is up to them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so, yeah, for like a year and a half, I continued to overextend myself in multiple directions. And so maybe I delayed my path, or maybe I just needed to like even deeper lived experience of why. Um, I feel like we can't really make a wrong choice. All we do is evolve that aspect of our life a little bit higher if we choose to need to learn that lesson a little bit longer. And we always end up in the same place, whether it's this lifetime or next lifetime. Um, yeah, but it really is. It's tricky to discern the ego and the higher self and what the real message
Mm-hmm.
is.
Yeah, definitely. That seems to be the work for sure. And it's interesting. You mentioned the integration and the holding space. I had the opposite realization at one point in time. At least when I was younger, I'm a little better at it now. But I was so fascinated by the inner experience. Like, where are people going? What do you see? Who are you talking to? What kind of dynamics are out there? What does it feel like and taste like and touch like and all the things, right? And so I was, when I was working with friends and guiding them, I was always like interrupting their journey to be like, where are you at now? And realizing like, wait, this is integration that I'm trying to do, but I'm trying to do it while I'm sitting with them. So I need to like be focused more on the integration and maybe not so much on the facilitation part of it. And that definitely, opened up a lot more opportunities for me to dig a little deeper into the experiences once they're back already. So again, it's interesting. And I actually have some theories that maybe there is a space for guide and there is a space for integration and they're maybe not the same. Maybe do like a catch up, like, hey, how did things go in the ceremony, that type of thing. And then you have an opportunity to work with somebody on the other side to reduce burnout, to do checks and balances and all that other kind of thing. So I think, good insight on that. One thing we talked about that I know we have about 10 minutes left or so, but I didn't want to get these last two questions in. So I hope you don't mind a little bit extra. One thing we talked about at the beginning that I thought was interesting for us to at least touch on a little bit is this idea, and we're going to do a panel coming up, which unfortunately was canceled or rescheduled, but around this idea of fear and surrender. So, how do you sort of recommend for people as they come into these experiences, where they're on the front side, where there's a lot of anxiety and fear before the experience, or they're deep in it and they're seeing stuff that they just, don't necessarily want to see and it's coming at them? How do you guide someone around the fear and the surrender process that people oftentimes sort of respond to or talk about when they have these experiences?
Yeah, I find so whenever I'm opening space, it's such a slow grounding process. I not only do just like somatic practices to drop in the body, but my process of calling in all of the guides and teachers that are going to be assisting us, I find that you can feel the energy in the space. It's just like, okay, we're ready. And through my application process, I already know the bulk of what we're going to be clearing. So I actually tell them ahead of time. I'm like, hey, through your application process and our time together prior, these are the energies that I see here that are going to need to be cleared. And so usually they're like, okay, like they're prepared and yeah, they feel good about it. And I always remind them, you and I both are entering the unknown together. Neither of us know really what's going to happen. When you do some clearing, the clearing that was already aware before going into ceremony, usually it reveals deeper stuff. Um, but honestly, I don't really think that we should ever be seeing things that we don't want to see, like scary images and stuff like that. That means there's some sort of interference in the space, and that's something that I can clear really quickly. And so really it's a matter of them just telling me. And I have had people who didn't want to like say that something was there for whatever reason, whether maybe they were aware or not aware that it was something, an aspect of themselves they were unconsciously protecting, that they were just used to having around, but it was, yeah, causing a challenging time in the ceremony. Cause like with me there, like the energy can kind of be like, oh, she's going to find us and like she's going to get us. And it's still up to, the client's higher self and their willingness to like surrender and like choose to do the healing. I can't force anything on them, even if I feel that there's something in the space that isn't supposed to be there. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've only had one client that wasn't in a surrendered space, and she never spoke up about it until the next day. She just said that it was, I want to give some quick little context to this because yeah, we were on a panel a couple months ago, and there was someone who asked a question at the end of it, about people with Parkinson's. And Eric Osborne had answered that he'd worked with quite a few people with Parkinson's and had found that they really struggled to continue to show up for the work, and most of them just didn't. And I actually emailed him after and just said that I felt just so much like gratitude for having heard his experience, having worked with many people with Parkinson's, because my one ceremony that I would say, went wrong was with a woman with Parkinson's. And, he just kind of affirmed to me, and his answer was that there's just something so deep and so heavy that it's really hard for them to go into and to look at. And so, anyways, it just gave me grace for myself, knowing that like I can't force someone to surrender. And I know how hard it is, surrendering. I mean, every day we have to surrender to, the unknown. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know whether our dreams are going to unfold how we want them to. And yeah, I think I'll leave it there.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, and I think that's a constant, we're always, like you're saying, we're always facing these types of things and learning how to sort of interact with that. But sometimes in these experiences, you might, have to face it a little bit more quickly or more often, just as things kind of go through, especially if you're doing, life reflections or visioning ahead or what have you, or seeing beings or entities that are unfamiliar or any of that type of thing. So I think it's just a good thing for people in general to kind of keep in mind. Um, One question we always ask our guests that are on the show that I want to ask you today, um, uh, kind of just speaks to sort of the general movement of what we're doing here. When somebody says the words decriminalize nature to you, what do you think about? What does that bring up for you?
I mean, to me, that means just making it accessible for everyone to easily work with Mother Nature's medicines. Have access to ayahuasca, access to mushrooms, and the ability to receive their medicine. To me, it means honestly getting rid of a lot of the pharmaceuticals that are, creating more problems, instead of just healing the ones that they're intended for. Yeah, I mean, I really believe that it just would be so beautiful and so powerful for everyone to be, maybe not ayahuasca. I believe that it needs a specific type of reverence, but if people or everyone was growing their own mushrooms, were able to spend every day praying with it, telling it these are my intentions, singing to them, doing art around them and then consuming them and having that just be a beautiful cycle that they get to do. And yeah, I just believe that we were intended to have access to it. So I'm grateful that yeah, you're doing the work to help make that happen.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Shannon. Appreciate it. Well, I'd like to toss it over to Rachel. Rachel has a little quick question here, and I'm sure some comments as well. Rachel, go ahead.
Okay, excellent. Okay, Shannon, first of all, I feel like I was like meant to hear your story today. Like the whole world, yes, it was an amazing story, but like me personally, your story right now, I really needed to hear it. So, just like you, I grew up very, very religious, Catholic, all that kind of stuff. And just like you, I went to a big city and like I became a go-go dancer there. I like built a whole life, but then now I'm back home. And so last Sunday, I went to church with my dad. I don't usually go to church necessarily, but my dad's Catholic. It's something that we have together, and I have a different understanding of the readings and everything now that I've been in, of course, entrenched in plant medicine and all of that juicy good stuff of Mother Earth. And it was Pentecost last Sunday. So you saying about like being like the Pentecostal aspect of it, and just for people who don't know, like Pentecost is more about like the breath of life, the Holy Spirit, that whole perspective in all of it. And so this idea of like your voice and like you saying like Chiron in Gemini, I'm like my Chiron's in Gemini, and that idea of like speaking your truth just came out. I was just like, oh my gosh, like and this is not the initial question, but have you seen K-pop Demon Hunters, the movie?
No.
You, my friend, are a demon hunter. You are like go just let's just do a
I
quick
love it.
search. But like literally, I was just like, girl, like we go out and slay demons together in the etheric realm. Like I get such a great vibe off you. So thank you for doing your thing out there, Earth Angel, because that's the vibe I get off you. My real question is the stuff you were talking about, entities attaching to people, because I have noticed a big influx of that happening right now. I've had a few friends who have been going through I hesitate to call it a mental health crisis just because it's far more complex than that. Of course, I do think I'm not saying anyone who has bipolar or depression or anxiety, those things aren't real, but I do think there's another aspect of like spiritual attack, psychic attack, and regardless if people think of it as being real or not, they believe in you, right? So I think there's that going on in terms of like if you want to call it spiritual psychosis or like demons or all that kind of stuff. My question to you is: A, do you think big cities are more likely to carry more of these entities? And B, do you have any like quick tips for anyone who's, if let's say you're going to put yourself into like a vulnerable space like raving or any of these things where you're very open, do you have any like tips for anyone who's, let's say, is very sensitive, very like psychically aware, right? All because magic is agnostic, right? So good magic, bad magic. Sometimes it's hard to discern, right? Especially when the church is like all magic is bad, right? But so, yeah. Do you have any like quick tips for anyone to kind of help against like psychic shields or crystals or like something to kind of like help with? I think the influx of the negative energy that's coming up, which to your point, saying like we must be doing something right for them to be whoa, like it's
Yeah,
happening.
fighting.
They're gonna try to push back with their last gasp of whatever, but it's always darkest before the dawn, baby. So yeah, do you have any tips?
So, I mean, without a doubt, big cities have way more density floating around. I just had a really harsh like wake up call while I was in New York for 3 weeks
Mm.
recently. I mean, I just was slowly not feeling like myself. And like, I reached out to my mentor, and she was like, girl, you have to clean yourself every day. Like, every day when you come home, you need to clean yourself. And there was one day where, I mean, I ended up just staying in the entire day and throughout the day, like recounting different moments where, like, some was a little off, or like the moment where I started to feel a little shaky. And I mean, now these were entities, these were more like energy transference and things like that. But like, I mean, there was so much. But so the most important thing is the highest form of spiritual protection is integrity.
Mm.
And I that the day that I spent staying in doing all of the cleaning, I was like, why is this taking so long? Like, it should be quite quick for me to be able to like do this, especially if I sit with a medicine like Hape. It raises the vibration so quickly, and those things, a lot of them just go on their own without you having to individually go through. But what I had found is I had not 100% honored my truth. I had plans with a friend that like I kind of wasn't feeling, but we'd already planned it. And I was like, yeah, yeah, sure. Like I'm confirmed. And even that, so that essentially it was like a mini psychic attack where then the words that I was speaking to do the energy clearing did not have the same weight. And it really is that serious whenever we don't honor our truth. So, and with going to like raves and events like this, if you're not already feeling like a big ball of light, I would honestly say don't go. But if you're
Mm.
feeling like a big ball of light, don't even let the fear of something coming in be around you, or like be in your mind. Um,
Like
but if
that.
you're also in an area on the dance floor and you're like, ooh, like always listen to that really quickly and move. If you're in a conversation that there's just something a little off, leave. Like the politeness is just so not necessary. Here it comes, your energy.
Oh my
But yeah,
gosh, great tips. Those are awesome tips. I love what you said about the politeness thing. I think I saw a horror movie once where, like, because everyone is so polite, they just let the murderer in and, like, do whatever he wanted, basically. Because we're like, no one wanted to say anything that, like, oh, that's a little weird. But, like, trust your gut. Oh my gosh, don't let him into the house. Like, don't go, like, So, what you just said there, like, thank you for that.
thank you. And thank you. I love the Demon Slayer.
Oh yeah, girl, you keep doing your
Great.
thing. I picture you with like a big like staff of light, just that kind of thing. All right, back to you, Larry.
Awesome. Thank you, Rachel. Appreciate it. Thank you, Shannon, for all your insights so far. Is there anything we didn't cover today that you want to sort of plug in here for the rest of the audience?
I mean, I would love to say, like, I just recently started my Substack because like I said, in completing my memoir, it's a fucking great memoir. I mean, it goes all through my childhood, a lot of, cool information about my time doing sex work. And, I've actually been celibate for over 2 years now, and the book was birthed during that time. So I've got this epic, like, polarity of, being a worker and then being totally celibate and using sexuality from both sides. And it's really, the mission and intention behind it is to help humanity do the healing work and gain the understanding around sexuality so they can actually find their beloved. Because I believe, if anything, that is actually one of the, if not the most powerful evolutionary vehicle that there is to actually be with the person that was made for you in this lifetime. Um, so yeah, check out my Substack. It's Wild Innocence. And then Instagram is Gypsy in the Wild. And yeah, if anyone is feeling like they've got something yucky in their field and they want to have someone really comb through with clear eyes, their soul blueprint and see what's going on, I invite them to come to Guatemala and sit with me.
Great. Wonderful, Shannon. And Shannon, please send along all that information too, and we'll put that in the little blurb underneath the podcast as well so people can contact you. What a pleasure having you here. Thank you so much. We got to talk about all the fun things that sometimes our conversations in this podcast go in that direction, but you were very open to all the things, and I love the deep dives into the weird and unusual, which I think you touched on a little bit as well there. So I really appreciate that, and hearing your story, and you've done so much in your life. So I really just want to honor that, and hopefully we can come back on another time and get a little deeper in some of these conversations because there are so many different trajectories. I would have loved to spend a little bit more time on there that we didn't get a chance to, but maybe we'll have to start doing some long form. Rachel, what do you think about long form for some guests here? Have like a little 3 hour something like that, and just see where we go. Yeah.
Oh
Yeah,
my
I
God, this
mean,
was so fun.
yeah,
Yeah.
sure, yeah, yeah. And he's
Yeah.
probably used its own tool system as well.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, Shannon. Really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone, for listening in today. We're going to have this podcast coming out in the next month or so. Check out on our Spotify and other channels if you want to hear this again or share with other folks. Reminder that we typically go every 2 weeks, but our next podcast is going to be on, looks like June 7th with Ellie, who's also a deep journeyer, does some work in Oregon with some of the facilitator sessions out there. Also does a lot of clown work, which is really fantastic at the festival scene, Burning Man, and things like that. So she's got a great sense of humor around all this, and also is doing a psychedelic chaplaincy, so we can talk about the intersection of all these different spaces as well. So that'll be happening on June 7th, and then we're going to take a little break for the summertime. So go ahead and catch up on what we've done in the past, and then we'll be coming back in September for season 4. So thank you, for Rachel, for keeping it going for all these amazing seasons. Again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Shannon. Please subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and please reach out to Shannon if you have any additional questions or want to hear more from her as well. Until next time, everybody, tune in, stay rooted, and let's grow together. Have a great Friday. Bye bye now.
Thank you.